Konflikt 47, a better sci-fi war game, today on Attention Span Labs. Hello and welcome to another episode of Attention Span Labs. I'm your host, author Michael A. DiBaggio. Today I'm going to talk to you about my new favorite 28mm war game, which is called Konflikt 47. Now, this is not, it's a fairly popular war game, but it's not super well known. It's certainly not in the realm of, say, Warhammer 40k or its sister game, Bolt Action. But Konflikt 47 is a game produced by Warlord Games, Clockwork Goblin, which originated the idea, and Osprey Games, who prints and formats the books. But as I just suggested there, Konflikt 47 is based on the Bolt Action World War II 28mm rule set. This is a very, very popular, one of, if not the most popular, World War II miniature war games. The only real competition with it, I think, is the 15mm Flames of War. But it's super popular in casual gameplay and tournaments. Has an extremely well supported miniatures line. But Konflikt 47 is different because it's an alternate history sci-fi World War II. It's in the weird war genre, which basically presupposes that, as the title suggests, the war continues on to the year 1947. History unfolded a little bit differently, and there's a lot of weird gonzo sci-fi stuff. I say gonzo because some of the forces are somewhat outlandish, but they're very interesting. For instance, you have walkers and Tesla tanks, powered armor, and so forth, in addition to like the regular World War II equipment. And the general idea is that history took an alternate path. The Americans got the bomb a little early in 1944, and before D-Day actually dropped the bomb on Germany, trying to get them to surrender. This actually created a rift in space-time through which transmissions from an unknown source were received that allowed everybody to decode them, to develop strange weaponry. And this basically gave, with the Americans only having the one bomb at the time, they basically shot their wad, and Germany didn't surrender, and then they got some advantages coming through with these mysterious transmissions. But the Americans also, with their test weapon, also had a rift, and they were able to develop some stuff. So World War II develops differently. The Americans don't share their technology. The Soviets leave the war and declare war on the Americans and the British. And the war continues by various means through 1947. We're going to talk more about that later. But as I said, this is a derivation of the Bolt Action rule set. Specifically, the Bolt, you can see the Bolt Action is displayed prominently on the three books there. So Bolt Action is, as I said, 28mm sci-fi war game rule set. It has some very neat rule conventions, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, but this is based on the first edition Bolt Action, with some additions from some other Warlord games, war games, such as the reaction rules from Beyond the Gates of Antares, and maybe some other stuff that I'm not super familiar with. But so this is Konflikt 47. This is my army here, and I'm going to talk quite a bit more about my army, how I got into it, why I like it, and why I think you should play it. In that, we're going to talk about the rule set, why it's good, and just something different, and perhaps more accessible in many ways than other sci-fi war games, which I've talked about on here in the past, and we'll be talking about less and less as time goes on. Particularly Warhammer 40k, but I'll be making direct comparisons to that because I think both in terms of miniatures, of affordability, of the book bloat issue, of all kinds of reasons, that this is a much better war game and deserves a much better, a much larger audience for those who are interested in sci-fi wargaming. Okay, so how I got into Konflikt 47 is not that long a tail because I've only heard about it since March. Late March, I stopped in my game store and saw these. I hadn't been in there in a while, but I had seen these walker miniatures, specifically this American Mud Skipper walker and this Jackal jump walker here, and I picked them up right away. They were reasonably affordable. I think one was like $30 and the other one was like $45 or something like that. But they looked really cool, looked different. I was going to use them for my Imperial Guard. So as you can see, I actually modified these two before I started painting them, before I decided I would use these in its own game. For Warhammer 40k, I gave an extra chain gun here from Anvil Industries set to this Jackal jump walker. You can see it's a jump walker because it's designed to fly. So these are paratrooper units, but I thought they would go very well with my Imperial Guard Spaceborne interface units that I was making, which I will do a video on at some point just to show you them. But anyway, as you can see there, I added a heavy bolter instead of the medium machine gun on the Mud Skipper jump walker here. But as I was painting these up and building them, a couple of my friends who I game with expressed interest in this game itself. One of my friends, Jeff, suggested that he was actually going to get the Japanese starter box because it was a very good price, very good deal. Had a bunch of really interesting miniatures, and I decided, yeah, what the hell, I'll actually repaint these and paint them up for Konflikt 47. So again, that was back in late March. So I had these two to start, and then after that I decided to get a starter set, which was actually a bolt action starter set. It was the Band of Brothers starter set. It was like $90. It came with basically a platoon of American paratroopers and a squad of German Panzer Grenadiers. Came with a German Hanomag half-track, and some ruins and stuff. So it was a very, very good price deal. There was something like 35 troops or something like that, a vehicle and a bunch of ruins, plus the bolt action rule book, all the templates, order dice that I needed, and also suppression markers, which are these things here, which will also type on the game. But anyway, so I started that, and I wasn't sure at the time whether I was going to make a German or American force. I ended up deciding on Americans because I had I started already buying the American walkers, and from there my force grew pretty substantially. And as I said, again, this video is being shot in July. It's July 18th today, and I started this. I really started painting them in the beginning of April, and I have to say I enjoyed this so much, and I had never before painted and assembled such a large army in that short a time. And that's one of the things that I really like about this game. The miniatures are good quality. They're compared to Games Workshop. They're not expensive at all. There's a huge variety of them. Because of the World War II setting, a lot of vehicles and even infantry miniatures are available in STL formats to print. So I was able to print most of this army here is actual Warlord game kits, but several of the units, this Sherman with a swappable turret I have here between a Sherman 76mm gun and a Sherman with a 105mm howitzer, these two Jeeps, bring them closer here, you can see the detail on them. Okay. Will you zoom in on that? No. Okay, well, darn this camera. But the Jeeps, the M7 Priest, the Defrocked Priest, one of the Deuce and a Half trucks, they were 3D printed. So, these are designs that are real life designs, and so they're readily available everywhere. So that helped. But the general price point for these things is maybe, you might pay $35 for a 10-12 man squad, often less than that. Vehicles are anywhere from $25 to $30 depending on their size. You do not find in general 100. There are some $100 miniatures. These are like the very large, heavy walkers that Germany has or the Soviets have. But generally, these were all very affordable price points. I was able to pick them up, week after week, and I was able to finish. They're simple to assemble for the most part. They have good instructions, and they're easy to paint because you don't have to. There's not as excessive detail as there is on like every Games Workshop miniature now, where there's just too much to paint. There's too much to even see, when you're working on them. These have excellent detail without being, ostentatious, we'll say. If you can paint them, because it is a historical war game, but it's also a science fiction alternate history war game. You're not limited, of course, to painting them or putting the decals on in historical ways, right? You can have fun, but still, I was able to paint them in pretty simple colors. Most of it was done with a particular coat of Krylon spray paint. And I'll talk more about the painting stuff in another video. But a couple colors of Vallejo, World War II range, and then washed, and only certain vehicles that I do a camouflage paint on. But these were very satisfying to paint, even in large numbers when I was cranking out the 24-man Band of Brothers unit, and then expanding my other units. The assembly line painting style went pretty fast, and the vehicles were really fast. I had a really good system down. I was able to, usually once a vehicle was assembled and spray painted, I could have it finished, full details, including decals, weathering, in about 3.5 to 4 hours, not working too hard on it. So, yeah. Could I have built a Warhammer army of this size in that short of time? History says no, not to this quality of which that I was able to paint and assemble them, and not without really damaging my wallet. Or this was. I'm not gonna say you could do this on $23. Obviously not. You might spend a couple $100, but that's about for you could by buying one of the starter sets, you could have a very functional, useful fighting force and have it assembled in a long weekend, assembled and painted in a long weekend. So that's one of the things I really like about it. I also really like the system, and this bolt action system that it uses with some modifications. One of the key points to it are, you see these dice in front of every unit here, right? These are called order dice, and that's the first big difference you see between this and another system like Warhammer. It's it's a semi-alternating activation. So instead of the I go, you go, where your opponent moves and shoots and does all the stuff for his entire army, and you sit around waiting for 10 minutes to do anything, and you're just reacting, rolling dice. This, what you do is you have, for every one of your units, so every one of your squads, every one of your vehicles, and then also if you have your squads mounted in vehicles like these half tracks here, or in a Jeep or something like that, or in the truck, or the defrocked priest, that you can, they get their own activation too, own order dice, so that you give them different orders. And there's 6 different orders. There's advance, which is you can move your normal distance and shoot. Run, which is basically you double your normal distance and don't shoot. Fire, you stay where you are and you open fire. Rally is if your unit is demoralized by taking enemy fire, taking casualties, you can recover from that. Ambush is basically they stay where they are and don't do anything, and elect to fire if someone comes within range on the other player's turn. And down, which is basically they hit the dirt and try to avoid being shot, and it gives some extra penalties to shooting at them. But you put these dice in a bag, you shake up the bag, and then somebody pulls a die from the bag, and if it's your die, then you get to select whatever unit you want and give it that order. And then when that's all resolved, stick your hand in the bag, pull another one out, and if that's yours, you go again. If it's your opponent, then they take the die and they give one of their units an order, until every unit on the table or in the army has an order, then that's the end of the turn, and then you put all the dice in the bag and you do it again. So that is, I think, a big improvement over the I Go, You Go system. I played a lot of other sci-fi games that are alternating activation, which is basically one person activates the unit and does their stuff, and then the other person activates the unit, and always goes back and forth. This is a very neat compromise, and it adds, because of the luck element to it, it adds some suspense. It usually balances out pretty well. Like if you have an even number of forces, then you very often go, and then your opponent goes, and so forth. But it adds an extra dimension to the game with the having more units can basically benefits you, because your dice are more likely to be picked, and then you may be able to take the initiative over from your opponent. So that's one big thing. One of the big differences that this has from bolt action, either first or second edition, is that units can react by passing a morale test. So each unit, this is very heavily based on unit quality, very much like, say, the Star Grunt 2, which was pretty much my favorite traditional sci-fi war game system, which is basically all based on unit quality and unit leadership. So you have your inexperienced troops and your regular troops and your veteran troops, and they cost more or less points depending on that. But they have a morale value, and like obviously inexperienced troops have lower morale value than regular, have lower value than veterans, and it's easier to kill inexperienced troops than is regular, easier to kill regular troops and veterans, so forth. And like that, there's shooting and firing, there's firing penalties and combat bonuses for these other groups based on their quality. But that's another benefit, that really being able to have units that are the same composition but different unit qualities doesn't ever really appear in Warhammer. So if you're used to playing that, it itself is a difference. But you can make very cheap army that has like the same units that one army can be very cheap, filled with mostly inexperienced forces or regular forces, or a very elite unit that's much more expensive, but the same units that have veterans. So you can customize your army in a lot of different ways. But anyway, back to these reactions. So these reactions, you make a morale test so that even if it's not your turn and you haven't moved yet, for instance, if you're being shot at by an enemy and you're within a certain range, you can roll a test. If you pass the test, you can do a firefight, which means that you also exchange fire with the enemy. If you're being assaulted, you can try to do a stand and shoot, where you basically get an extra round of shooting before your enemy charges you. You can do an escape, where you run away. There's certain units, reconnaissance units, like say this Pawn Skater Scout Walker here, or this M18 Hellcat, which are recce units. And what they can do is, even if they have taken an order, if they're under fire, they can roll a recce test and basically reverse at full speed, and often that puts them out of the range, so the enemy wastes their shot. Makes these scout units very, very survivable. So another difference with basic bolt action is that there are bolt action does have unit tags, which are basically special rules that a given unit will have. But these Konflikt 47 expands them. For instance, there are German werewolves and German vampires and German zombies and Japanese zombies, and there's American superheroes called paragons, one of which a custom one I have over here, which actually was printed from Anvil Industries set. But they have a bunch of different statuses, like tough, for instance, where if they are hurt or if they are killed, they can roll a dice, and if they roll 5 or 6, they actually shrug it off. Some of them cause horror, like the Soviet werebears or the German werewolves, for instance. They basically have a morale effect, which they reduce everybody's morale when they come within a certain distance of them. There are resilient ones, like these American powered armor troops that basically have the damage resistance of a soft skin vehicle, like a Jeep or or a truck, so that you have to roll a 6 every time to try and kill one of them. There are units that can fly or jump, again, like these American paratrooper units, the Jackal and the Mud Skipper back there. Some units are slow, some units are fast and agile and so forth, but some of them basically carries over all of the statuses from bolt action, and then adds in some additional ones that are sort of a sci-fi horror bent. And this adds a lot of really interesting variety to the game. If you're a person who's interested in historicals and is interested also in experimenting with a bit more of a fantasy game, this is a good medium step. If you're someone who is mostly played sci-fi fantasy games and you're interested in getting into historicals, this is a good bridge to that too. Because the other nice thing about this is, because the rules and most of the units are cross-compatible between Bolt Action and Konflikt 47, you're basically buying one army to play 2 different games. And that is really a tremendous value. It's hard to someone who doesn't play war games, to convey this to them is there's a enormous investment involved in every time you want to start a new war game, and you have to buy a whole new army. Usually you have to buy a new set of rules. Now, obviously, if you want to play bolt action, if you want to play Konflikt 47, you have bolt action, you can just take your existing bolt action army right into Konflikt 47. You don't need any new troops, but you could buy a unit of power armor here or a walker here or there, and you're fine. And actually, the units are balanced enough that a good bolt action army can perform very well and defeat a Konflikt 47 unit heavy unit army. But and also vice versa, if you have Konflikt 47, you can play bolt action. Now, obviously, you can't take your walkers or your werewolves or your power armor or whatever the special Konflikt 47 units are, but you can. For instance, if you have this Sherman Tesla right here, this model, I didn't paint it or build it, but this model comes with this. It's the regular bolt action Sherman model. And it comes with the normal Sherman turret, which I don't have here. I have this 3D printed one, but yeah, so the 3D printed one works on there too. But so you can build it with the Tesla turret, which is a really cool weapon, by the way, for Konflikt 47, and then you can swap off the turret, give it the regular Sherman 75 millimeter or 76 millimeter gun turret, and just play that in bolt action. So that is a big benefit right there. It's, if you're looking at pretty much any other game, with the any other like mainstream game, certainly the Games Workshop games, you can't usually, certainly not in tournament style, which I don't recommend anyway. But you can't have carry your 40k army over to Age of Sigmar, or if you have, an Infinity Force carried over to Malifaux. I mean, if you're playing with decent people and you want to use proxy miniature, absolutely you can. But it often, you're trying to come up with new rules for different weapons or different units because those units are not actually represented in the game. Whereas the bolt action units all bolt action units are represented in Konflikt 47, and most Konflikt 47 units are represented in bolt action. So that's a huge benefit. The other benefit I want to talk about is that there's only, for right now, 3 books for Konflikt 47. And you absolutely only need, depending on the army you pick, you only really need the first one, the Konflikt 47 main book there, to play. Now, if you want to play Japan or the 2 Italian, the different Italian forces, if you want to play Finland, then you're going to want to get the Defiance or Resurgence book, because the main Konflikt 47 rulebook basically only covers the units for the Americans, the British, the Germans, and the Soviets. So there are in each of the 2 additional books. So these books are like $30 a piece too. They're not $80 tomes, $90 tomes. They're filled with great illustrations, great artwork. That it uses like some of the artwork from the Osprey books, since Osprey publishes them. If you're not familiar with Osprey produces a range of historical reference books that are very useful for modelers and wargamers and just history enthusiasts in general. But then there's great photos of the painted miniatures and some nice terrain and everything. And there's also, in each of the two books, Defiance and Resurgence, the two supplemental books, there's errata, and there's a lot of errata in this game. I'm going to eventually talk about some things I don't like about the game, but there's a lot of errata, and they kind of patchiness and change rules as they're going along. And most of those rule changes, I think, are for the better. But you can, feel free to play them with the original Konflikt 47 rules, or sort of like the optional advanced rules or modifications in Defiance or Resurgence. But they also come with additional units, because they do. I don't know that they've come out with any new models this year, but they have come out with a bunch of new units since the original release for pretty much all parties. So there's always there's new vehicles, new infantry options, new force structures. So the basis of this game is a reinforced platoon, and it tells you, in addition to the point cost, however many points you want to play, a platoon, and you can field more than one platoon too. You'll have a core unit of so many infantry squads and a lieutenant, because it's primarily an infantry-based game, and then you can add on like a higher ranking officer. You can have machine gun teams. You can add on tanks or walkers, or up to a certain number is specified, depending on not only which nation you play, but which force. Like my force is a very heavily oriented towards U.S. airborne, but there are some like regular Army infantry units in it as well, and you can mix and match those. So Konflikt 47 is, I think, an excellent choice for someone both looking to get into 28mm wargame and someone looking to try something different. As far as a sci-fi wargame goes, I like it a lot better than the stuff Games Workshop's putting out now. It definitely scratches that itch. It's more affordable. The rules are concise. You're not getting a chapter approved coming out every so often. That, like I said, there is a lot of errata, but it's not fundamentally. These are basically like typos and misprints, or like they forgot to include a stat block somewhere. Whereas they're not, every year they're releasing a new edition of an army, new codex come out, and it's an arms race. And can you not afford to buy every codex, including every army that your codex for every army that you're going to play, just to keep up on all the rule changes and all the unit changes. So on the downside, a couple things I don't like about Konflikt 47. They're actually mainly setting oriented. But I will mention first the errata. This really needs, I think, a second edition of the game, not necessarily to bring it up to be compatible with second edition bolt action, but with the reaction rules add-ons. It needs a second edition of the game to sort of combine all the units that are in Defiance and Resurgence into one book, add the new bolt action units that came out in there, and then also to correct, because the statuses that I talked about before, like say horror or jump troops, or what it means to be a tough fighter, have changed significantly. And certainly, there's explanations for how they work in the game. There's this suppression fire is an option now, and these are really valuable and interesting things and great clarifications, which I have to say are not just theoretical, because when I played this, I played a total of 4 Konflikt 47 games so far, and these issues of concern, of confusion in the book really do come up in the game. So they really I'd like to play all games with a game master, but if you don't have a game master, there's bound to be some actual good faith arguments on what the rules mean for some of these cases. So that's why I think it needs a second edition of the rules. But you can compile them yourself. The erratas are actually available for free. These books are also available in PDF for cheaper, but you can get I prefer for Wargame rules reference, I prefer to have them in paperback or hardcover format, so you have them at the table, and you can get them fairly cheap secondhand too. But yeah, so that's one problem. The other problem is the setting, which I'm going to do a whole other video on, because I have not been that satisfied with the setting. I think it's an excellent premise. Certainly Weird War is awesome. I'm super interested in that. I'm super interested in alternate history. What I'm less taken by is the timeline. As I said, basically everything's the same up until 44, then some really weird things happen, and the war continues for another 3 years. Well, one of the problems with Konflikt 47 is that it is determined to only have a technological explanation, even though the core premise is inherently supernatural, right? There's no, there's an idea of this dimensional rift by which encoded transmissions are coming through from parties unknown that allow them to develop Tesla cannons and walkers and werebears and crap like that. That's inherently a supernatural thing, but they, I guess, in an attempt to Clockwork Goblin, the originators of the game, in an attempt to distinguish themselves from all the other Weird War stuff that's out there, like, Octung Cthulhu or Dust Tactics or Hellboy or the Weird War or RPGs. They're like, no, this is purely technological. The problem with that, though, is that there's no way that the Axis, in particular, Japan and Germany after 1944, can sustain the war for that long. And they go even farther, because they want all these armies to be available. And they go even farther and have, hey, Finland is still operating and they're still allied with the Germans, and Italy is actually two factions, and the northern part of Italy is still loyal to Mussolini and the Germans, and then there's a co-belligerent Italian faction. So in an attempt to make as which I don't blame them for, keep as many many armies available with as unique units as possible. Basically, everybody's in the war. Almost nothing happened for 3 years. Just a lot of back and forth. That doesn't make any kind of sense to me. Because Germany still has a fuel problem. They didn't conquer the Caucasus. They're trying to penetrate to the Middle East, but only like in 47 did they ally with Turkey, and are driving towards the Anglo-Persian oil fields. Japan is still mostly starved out, and they have these wonderful submarines. Okay, but how are they building them? They were, remember, this is until late 19, even considering only Germany had the Rift tech, Japan didn't even start getting the Rift tech until very late 1944 or early 1945. So there's no way that basically America in particular, whose industrial capacity, considering they all have this super technology, the U.S. would just produce way more walkers, way more Tesla tanks, way more powered armor. And in fact, even in the book, they do, the U.S. is starting to outfit entire battalions with powered armor. There's just no way that the Axis could possibly sustain that, even with their wonder weapons, against the industrial might, particularly of the United States. There's no, considering that the Soviets declare war on the U.S. and Britain, then there's also then they're cut off from lend-lease equipment and so forth, which isn't touched on too much. But so that is implausible. And you say, well, but there's werewolves and vampires. Yeah, okay. But that's acceptable. That's part of the premise. It's like with Pacific Rim, are giant monsters fighting giant robots? Is that inherently ridiculous? Yes. But that's the premise you accept, right? On the other hand, when it's everything's the same until 1944, and then you start to get these things, but then after that, nothing really changes, and nobody gets knocked out of the war. I mean, it's ridiculous. If only the Axis had the super weapons, maybe. But they still have the fuel problems. They still have the transportation problems. They still have the can't produce enough airplanes, or in Japan they couldn't produce enough airplanes. They can't produce enough ships. They lost most of their fighter bomber crews and so forth. These are real problems. So I have some ideas on how to to improve that situation. But that is the main thing that I don't like about the game. Okay, with that said, I'm going to cut the video short here, and I'll post another video where I talk about a good way to get into Konflikt 47, how to use the starter box sets to your best advantage, and what you'll probably need to augment them in order to play an effective game. But for now, that's it. Thank you for tuning in and listening to me ramble for half an hour. If you have any questions about Konflikt 47, or if you're interested in getting into historical or weird wargaming, I'd like to hear about it in the comments below. Please like and subscribe to my channel, and stay tuned for some more.